There's a moment that looks like love from the outside, but feels like pressure on the inside. You get closer, more open, more consistent, more emotionally present. And instead of relaxing, the avoidant changes. They don't say, "This is too much." They don't explain what's happening, but something inside them activates an internal alarm, not loud, not visible, but powerful enough to shift everything. Because for the avoidant system, feeling deeply loved doesn't always feel safe. Sometimes it feels like something they need to escape. Most people think love creates safety. The more care, the more consistency, the more emotional presence, the more secure the relationship becomes. And for many people, that is true. Closeness feels grounding. Being chosen feels reassuring. Being loved feels like home. But for the avoidant nervous system, love can activate something very different. Because love is not just warmth, it is exposure. To be loved means to be seen, not just partially, fully. Your emotions, your needs, your patterns, your vulnerabilities. And for a system that learned early to rely on itself, that level of visibility can feel overwhelming, even when it is safe, even when it is gentle, even when it is real. This is where the internal alarm comes from, not from danger, from intensity, because love increases emotional stakes. It deepens connection. It creates importance, and importance activates awareness. How much does this matter? What happens if I lose this? How much of me is now involved here? These questions don't always appear as thoughts. They appear as sensations. Tightness, restlessness, the subtle feeling that something is becoming too real. And that too real feeling is what triggers the alarm. The avoidance system is not afraid of people. It is sensitive to emotional dependence, because dependence means something important. It means your emotional state can now be affected by someone else, their presence, their absence, their behavior, and that level of influence can feel destabilizing. So when love reaches a certain depth, the system reacts, not by rejecting love, but by regulating it. This is why the shift often feels sudden. One moment, everything is open. The next, something changes. The avoidant becomes quieter, more distant, less emotionally expressive. Not because they stopped caring, because the system started protecting. The internal alarm does not say, "This person is wrong." It says, "This is getting too intense. This matters too much. This could affect you." And instead of moving closer, the system creates space. This is where many people get confused, because from the outside, love was increasing, the connection was deepening, everything was moving in the right direction. But internally, the avoidant was crossing a threshold, a point where closeness stops feeling neutral and starts feeling like something that needs to be managed. Understanding this changes everything, because what looks like emotional withdrawal is often a response to emotional activation. Too much care, too much closeness, too much meaning, all at once. And when that happens, the system does not lean in. It stabilizes by stepping back. This is not a lack of capacity for love. It is a sensitivity to what love activates internally. And until that sensitivity is understood, the same pattern keeps repeating. Closeness grows, the alarm activates, distance appears, and the connection shifts without explanation. To really understand this internal alarm, you have to see what the avoidance system is actually reacting to, because it's not love itself. It's what love starts to require. Love creates visibility, not surface level. Emotional visibility, the kind where someone begins to know you, your patterns, your reactions, your inner world. And for many avoidants, that level of being known was never neutral. It was unpredictable, sometimes safe, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes unavailable. So the nervous system learned something important. Stay in control of what is seen. Reveal carefully. Don't give too much access. But real connection doesn't stay partial. It deepens, naturally. And as it deepens, that control starts slipping. You become more open, more expressive, more emotionally present. And that's when the alarm begins. Because now the system feels something changing. Too much access, too much exposure, too much of me is in this. There is also another layer. Expectation, not spoken, felt. When someone loves you deeply, they don't just feel, they respond, they show up, they invest, and that creates a subtle shift. The relationship is no longer optional. In the same way, it has weight, continuity, presence that is expected to remain. And for the avoidance system, that expectation can feel like pressure, not because they don't want connection, because sustained closeness requires consistency, and consistency means staying emotionally available. Over time, that is where the system begins to resist. There is also the experience of emotional responsibility. When someone loves you, you can affect them. Your distance matters. Your silence is felt. Your actions have emotional impact. And that creates a new awareness. If I stay in this, I can hurt someone. If I pull away, it will affect them. That level of influence can feel heavy because now connection is not just about what you feel, it's about what you cause. And that responsibility can activate the alarm even more. Then comes the deepest layer, dependency, not full dependency, the possibility of it. Because when love deepens, attachment forms, and attachment means losing someone would hurt. It would matter. It would affect you. And for a system built on self-reliance, that possibility can feel threatening, not consciously, but internally. So the system tries to reduce risk, not by leaving immediately, but by creating space, less emotional exposure, less intensity, less depth, just enough to regain control. This is why the shift can feel so confusing, because nothing externally went wrong. No conflict, no breakdown, no obvious reason. But internally, multiple layers activated at once. Visibility, expectation, responsibility, attachment, all increasing at the same time. And the system responded the only way it knows how. Regulate, contain, distance. From the outside, this looks like withdrawal. From the inside, it feels like stabilization. The avoidant is not thinking, I don't want this. They are feeling, this is a lot. I need space. I need to slow this down. And this is where many people misinterpret the moment. They think, if I show more love, they will feel safer. But for the avoidance system, more love at that point can feel like more intensity, more access, more expectation, more emotional weight, which means more activation, more alarm. So instead of pulling them closer, it often pushes the system further into protection, more distance, more containment, more emotional withdrawal. Understanding this reveals something powerful. The avoidant is not reacting to who you are. They are reacting to what the connection has become. Deeper, more real, more emotionally significant. And that significance is what activated the internal alarm. until that pattern becomes conscious. The same cycle repeats. Closeness grows. Love deepens. The alarm activates. Distance appears. And the connection shifts. Right at the moment, it starts to matter most. When the internal alarm activates, the change is not immediate. On the surface, it begins underneath. Subtle, almost invisible. The avoidant doesn't suddenly decide to pull away. They begin to feel something shift, a quiet tension, a need to adjust, to regain a sense of internal space. At first, it shows up in small ways. Less emotional expression, not cold, just slightly reduced. Where they once shared openly, now they filter. Where they once leaned in, now they pause. Not enough to raise concern immediately, but enough to change the tone. This is the beginning of regulation, not rejection, regulation, because the system is trying to lower emotional intensity without breaking the connection. So it does something precise. It reduces depth, keeps the interaction, but limits exposure. Conversations start to shift, still present, still engaged, but less revealing. Safer topics, less vulnerability, more neutrality, because vulnerability is what triggered the alarm. And now the system is trying to prevent further activation. Time also changes. Response patterns become slightly different. Not dramatic distance, just more space, more time to process, more time alone. Because space creates relief. It lowers the internal pressure. It restores autonomy. It brings the system back into balance. From the outside, this feels like confusion because nothing seems clearly wrong. The avoidant is still there, still communicating, still connected on some level, but something feels different. And that difference is what creates uncertainty. So naturally, you move closer. You try to reconnect the depth. You increase presence. You bring more warmth, more emotional clarity, hoping to restore what was there before. But here's what happens internally. The system is already activated, already regulating, already trying to reduce intensity. So when more closeness enters the dynamic, it doesn't feel like comfort. It feels like escalation. More emotion to manage, more exposure to regulate, more intensity to contain. And that strengthens the alarm, not because you did something wrong, but because the system interprets increased closeness as increased pressure. So the avoidant adjusts again. More distance, more containment, more internal space. Not abruptly, gradually, until the gap becomes noticeable. This is where the dynamic turns into a loop. You feel the shift. You try to reconnect. They feel the pressure. They step back. You feel more distance. You reach again. They withdraw further. Two movements happening at the same time. One seeking closeness, one seeking regulation. And they don't meet in the middle. They move in opposite directions. Inside the avoidant, there is conflict because the connection still matters. The feelings didn't disappear. The care is still there, but the intensity feels difficult to hold. So they exist in two states at once. Part of them wants to stay. Part of them needs space. This creates a strange experience. They may miss you while creating distance. Think about you while not reaching out. Feel connected while acting detached. Because the issue is not absence of feeling, it's difficulty sustaining intensity. The internal alarm does not erase emotion. It regulates how much of it can be experienced at once. And when the level feels too high, the system lowers it through space, through distance, through containment. This is why avoidance can seem contradictory, warm then distant, present then unavailable. connected then withdrawn. Not because they are inconsistent, because they are regulating intensity in real time. And this regulation has a purpose: to protect their internal stability, to prevent overwhelm, to maintain autonomy, even if it costs emotional closeness. From the outside, this can feel deeply confusing because love was growing, connection was deepening, everything was moving forward. And then suddenly, it wasn't. But from the inside, nothing sudden actually happened. A threshold was crossed, intensity increased, the alarm activated, and the system responded exactly as it was trained to. Understanding this changes the entire meaning of the shift because it reveals something most people miss. The moment they pulled back was not the moment they stopped caring. It was the moment the connection started to matter too much for their system to hold comfortably. And that is why the pattern repeats so often. Closeness builds, love deepens, the alarm activates, distance appears, not as rejection, but as regulation, until something changes inside the system. That loop continues, not because they want to hurt you, not because the connection was not real, but because their capacity to stay open under intensity has limits. And those limits are what shape the entire dynamic. Quietly, consistently, without explanation, until you finally see what's actually happening beneath the surface. The most important thing to understand about the alarm is this: it is not something you can turn off from the outside. You can't love it away. You can't reassure it away. You can't prove you're safe enough for it to disappear, because the alarm was never built to respond to you. It was built to manage what happens inside them. And this is where most people get pulled into confusion, because when someone pulls back after closeness, the instinct is to lean in more, to reassure, to clarify, to bring warmth, to restore what was just there. But the avoidance system doesn't interpret that as safety. It often experiences it as increased intensity, more emotion, more access, more expectation, and that means more activation. So the dynamic quietly escalates. You try to reconnect, they try to regulate. You increase presence, they increase distance. Not because either of you is wrong, but because you're responding to two different needs: connection and control. This is where the real shift happens. You stop asking, "How do I calm their alarm?" and start understanding it was never mine to calm. Because the moment you take responsibility for someone else's internal regulation, you lose your position inside the connection. You start adjusting to their limits, adapting to their distance, managing their responses, trying to stay just close enough without triggering their withdrawal. And slowly, you become less like yourself, more careful, more measured, more focused on not activating their system than on staying connected to your own. That is the hidden cost of this dynamic, not just the distance, the self-abandonment that can follow it. Understanding the alarm protects you from that, because it gives you clarity, not just about them, about the situation as a whole. You begin to see what's actually happening. Closeness increased, the system activated, distance followed. Not personal, not random, a pattern. And once you see it as a pattern, you stop chasing the moment before it. You stop trying to get back to the good part, because you understand that the good part and the withdrawal come from the same place, the same system, the same sensitivity to emotional intensity. So instead, you return to something real, your own center, your own pace, your own emotional truth. You stop overextending to maintain connection. You stop shrinking to avoid triggering distance. You stop negotiating with something that was never under your control. And from that place, your decisions change, not from reaction, from clarity. You begin to ask, can this connection hold depth consistently, or does it collapse under emotional intensity? Am I experiencing mutual presence or managed closeness? Those questions don't create distance, they create truth. And truth is what brings you back into alignment, because real connection does not require you to constantly calculate how much love is too much. It doesn't require you to reduce yourself to keep someone present. It doesn't ask you to carry both sides of emotional regulation. Real connection can hold closeness without activating escape. It can hold care without creating pressure. It can hold love without triggering withdrawal. And once you understand the difference, you stop chasing what feels intense but unstable, and you start recognizing what actually feels grounded and real. If this made something click, if you've experienced that moment where everything felt right and then suddenly shifted, then you already know how confusing this pattern can be. But now, you're seeing it clearly, not as rejection, not as mystery, but as a nervous system responding to intensity. And when you can see what's really happening, you stop getting pulled into emotional loops that don't make sense. You start moving with awareness, with precision, with control over your own direction. Subscribe to the Inner Odyssey if you want more of these deep psychological breakdowns, because most relationship advice stays on the surface, but the patterns that shape your experience live underneath, in the nervous system, in emotional conditioning, in the quiet responses that happen before words are even spoken. And once you understand those patterns, you don't just see other people more clearly, you see yourself differently. And that's where everything begins to change.